Hello, I'm Andrew Bizantz, the artistic director of Eugene Opera. This episode of Songs for Quarantine features a unique work, two texts combined into one song. Composer and poet Carolyn Quick wrote two poems that were related, but with starkly different viewpoints, and found an ingenious way to combine them in her song, To Breathe. Both poems and song were created as a visceral response to living in Portland during a time of protest. Quick chose to write To Breathe for a duet of soprano and mezzo-soprano. In a first-time collaboration, Eugene Opera reached out to Portland Opera and engaged two artists from their resident artist program, soprano Lynnesha Crump and mezzo-soprano Jasmine Johnson. Carolyn's music bridges multiple styles through lyricism and her orchestral ability. Her works have been performed throughout North America and Europe by ensembles including the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra, the South Puget Sound College Orchestra, and soloists from the Vancouver Opera's New Works project. She was featured on the inaugural concert of the up-and-coming chamber ensemble Symphony 21 and was also chosen as one of the 8 composers commissioned to write for Hearings, the opening concert of Fear No Music's Justice, Just Us season. Carolyn is also a singer and instrumentalist as well as a poet. She made her Eugene Opera debut as Miles in 2015's The Turn of the Screw. She has also sung with the Portland Symphonic Choir, the Oregon Bach Festival Chamber Choir, and has several poems published with the East County Poetry Group. I recently spoke with her about writing To Breathe. Carolyn, it's such a thrill to speak with you about To Breathe, one of the 5 winning compositions of Eugene Opera's Calls for Scores for Songs for Quarantine. It's a pleasure to get to meet you. I want to start right away actually talking about the poetry because it is such a prominent feature of the structure of this song and how it's structured. And unusually, we have 2 poems going on at the same time. So I'd love to talk to you about the inspiration for each of them. The first is called Centering and the second is called Riot. So just if you would briefly tell me what was the impetus for writing each of these poems.
Yeah, so Centering was the one that I wrote first. I wrote it kind of in the beginning of May, maybe a month or 2 into quarantine. And the piece was inspired I'm in a poetry group that sometimes will send out prompts. And this particular prompt was to go out into some sort of nature and take a walk. And when you felt ready to sit in silence for a little bit and then do a 5-minute timed write. So I went to Pal Butte Nature Park, which is not too far from where I live, and was walking around, found a nice little secluded spot in the trees and sat down and started writing. And so naturally, just because of when this happened and with the quarantine going on and everything, that definitely seeped into the poem, and it kind of explores those thoughts of isolation and just kind of taking everything in, centering, so to speak. And the other poem, in contrast, was written a few months later, but it was during everything that was going on at the Federal Building in downtown Portland. I work a night shift not too far from where that was going on, and so I kind of had a not entirely firsthand account, but very close proximity to that. And so, you can smell the tear gas, you can hear the fireworks going off, just really seeing everything happening. And so this poem was kind of my response to just the things that I was seeing and the things that I was observing there. So 2 very different poems, but both existing in this time of quarantine, which I thought that was important to represent both of those things because many of us, and this is just the first 6 months, right? We're still kind of in and out of quarantine, but for those first 6 months, that was both of those things were very integral parts to many of us. And that was part of the reason that I wanted to set both of them. So initially I was going to set them kind of one after the other, but it became very clear that first of all, the piece would be way too long if I did that. And second of all, it just didn't fit. I tried a few things bridging them together and it didn't work. And then I kind of had the thought, we were experiencing these things simultaneously. Why not set them simultaneously, which challenge in and of itself.
Well, actually, I want to ask you. I want to ask you about those challenges. What a terrific insight from you about how your creative brain started to see these things simultaneously. It's wonderful and really gives us so much context for this. So if we can talk technically a little bit. The text is very clear. When we were recording the piece with our wonderful soprano and mezzo, they did such a beautiful job. The text was always very understandable, or as I like to say, legible to the ear. Can you talk a little bit about what the challenges are overlaying two quite different texts, obviously from the same author, but two quite different texts, and how you solved some of those issues, musically specifically?
The problem with setting two different texts is, if you have two singers singing at the same time, which singer is your ear going to go towards? Because generally speaking, if they're singing two different words, it can be kind of hard to hear both at the same time. So there were a lot of times that I would try to stagger the text. That was one of the ways that I tried to kind of get around that issue. So like I start with the mezzo soprano, and she's singing the text from Riots, and that is much more agitated, a lot faster setting of the text. Whereas when the soprano comes in, she is kind of more in this escapist or just more pensive state. And so I actually have her lines, especially at the beginning, a lot more sustained, a lot longer. And so in that, because the mezzo was putting text out at a very different rate than the soprano, it was a little bit easier because I could kind of have the soprano start her word, mezzo speaking, but the soprano is still on the vowel. And then after the mezzo's line is done, you can have the soprano finish the word there. So that was one of the techniques I used. And then like the beginning has it's a lot more mezzo driven. It kind of shifts partway through the piece. The soprano has a lovely feature in the middle there. And then they kind of start to imitate each other, and it almost kind of has this circular motion. And I actually did a thing later in the piece where I kind of made a composite text where the soprano is singing to breathe, to breathe, to breathe, and repeating it over and over. And the mezzo is singing about the tear gas. And so she's saying the gas. And so you have kind of to breathe the gas. And that, in my mind, was kind of where the two are starting to come together to realize that this experience is happening together and that they are together in this. And that kind of continues to weave around each other until the very end, where they finally sing. The mezzo sings one line, except for the last word. The soprano sings the exact same line, and then they sing the last word together in unison.
Well, it's a pleasure speaking with you. One last question: what are you working on currently?
Recently, I've actually done a bit of musical theater and pop music through the Nats competitions just as a fun thing. But in terms of things that I'm writing, there's a piece that I wrote that was supposed to be for a cappella soprano, but I got a little excited and I'm toying with the idea of adding some fixed electronics to it, which I have never done before. So it's definitely beginning stages, but that's probably something I'm working right now. It's setting a text by Paul Laurence Dunbar that's really beautiful and evocative. So we'll see where that goes, I suppose.
Well, Carolyn, it's been a pleasure to talk to you, and we're so thrilled about being able to present To Breathe.
Thank you.
Here is Carolyn Quick's To Breathe, as performed by soprano Lynnesha Crump, mezzo-soprano Jasmine Johnson, and pianist Nathalie Fortin.
break free from this God-forsaken loop. It doesn't seem to end. Can't seem to break free from this God-forsaken free from the deafening cries and explosions of it, any and all of it. Insubordination.